Hey everybody, this is John Barrows with J Barrows Consulting, and I really appreciate you joining me here on my session for the Sales Development Summit, sponsored by InsideSales.com and Sales Hacker. I really appreciate what they're doing to help elevate the profession of sales, and specifically as it relates to SDRs. For those of you who don't know me, I've been in sales now for 21 years. I pretty much held every position you can imagine. Inside sales, making $400 a week, early days, and then VP of sales, sold my company off to Staples, and now I do sales training. And I work with companies like Salesforce, LinkedIn, Box, Dropbox, Okta, Aptos, a lot of the fastest growing SaaS companies out there. And, I've learned a lot along the way. I still train. Obviously, that's my main job, but my main passion is sales. And I love playing in the SaaS world for a couple of reasons, because obviously SaaS is, from a technology standpoint, pushes the envelope, but it also pushes the envelope from a sales standpoint. And there's so many new technologies, there's so many new things that are coming out right now that are affecting sales in a lot of ways, like artificial intelligence, a lot of these sales cadence tools. And it's really putting sales reps in an interesting position, in my opinion, to figure out how to evolve and stay relevant. And that's really what my topic that I wanted to chat about today was, and just share my thoughts and hopefully some tactics you can walk away with and do some stuff with, is the SDR role specifically. And how I think the SDR role is actually one of the most challenging and hardest roles in sales. SDR, BDR, whatever you want to call it, the role of outbound, calling into accounts, usually cold, who don't know us, and trying to set up meetings with higher level executives so that our AEs can then take it from there. I think it's one of the hardest jobs in sales for a lot of reasons. One is because usually the SDR or the BDR is typically paired up with 3, 4, 5 different AEs, right? And those 3 or 4 AEs, they all have 3 or 4 different likes and dislikes. Some of them are better than others. And so there's no standard, if you will, on how to handle an AE, because all the personalities are different. Some want to, hey, go after my top tier accounts, and I don't care, get me a meeting with anybody. Others are like, hey, it has to be qualified to this level before I'll even take the conversation. Some of them are great at uncovering the opportunity, even with the slightest bit of information qualified that we do as SDRs. Others are pretty lazy, and if BANT isn't 100% qualified, then they're like, yeah, whatever, I don't want to talk to this. So that's one of the big reasons why I think the SDR role is challenging. But I also think the other bigger challenge is the question of value, and how much value does an SDR or a BDR bring to the conversation when they make that initial outreach to somebody. And, because look, if you don't add enough value, then I don't see any value as a prospect of yours. So if you cold call me, if you don't add enough value during that 5, 10, 15-minute conversation, I don't see the value in taking that next step with you to engage with the rest of your organization or your AE. But if you add too much value, then you take away from the conversation of the AE, right? And then they're doubling up, and then the client gets even more annoyed because now we're having the same conversations. Like, why am I talking to you and them about the same thing? So the question of value is what I want to address today for the SDR. And it's not an easy question to answer. It's not an easy issue to address. But I do think I've come across one thing that can help. And it revolves around the case study. It revolves around a story that we tell somebody. Because I'm not going to sit there as an SDR. I know my role. Okay. I'm not the product expert here. So I shouldn't pretend like I am. And I want to set that expectation with the client that, look, this is not for us to do a deep dive into your situation or into our tools or technologies or whatever it is. This is purely to see if it's even worth having that conversation. Okay. So I think we need to set the stage, and I'll talk about some of those tactics as well. But really, I think the right amount of value for an SDR to bring to the conversation revolves around the story that we tell these clients and these prospects. And that's why I think case studies are such a great tool to use and leverage as ways to get people to talk to us and then engage in that brief conversation to show value to then set the stage for the next one. So I'll explain. For instance, my favorite way of running a call blitz is to reverse engineer a case study. Well, actually, let me back up a minute. People ask me about phone, right? John, should I make phone calls anymore? Should I leave voicemails? Because nobody picks up the phone and I'm not getting any callbacks. And look, I know obviously phone is becoming less and less of a means of communication, especially with the millennial crew coming upstream and not really growing up with the phone. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up with the phone. I like being on the phone. And I still do think the phone is an effective part of a communication strategy. It's not the only part. I'm not sitting here saying make 100 dials a day anymore. But I do think if strategically put in as part of the communication strategy, it definitely helps. But I also think that sprinkling phone calls throughout the day is a drastic waste of time. Making 2 or 3 phone calls, sending an email, making a few more phone calls, because you can't really learn anything. You can't gain any momentum, and it's just not effective. But where I know phone can be effective is when you hyper focus for an hour. I call them power hours, right? So for an hour, I'm going to sit there and make phone calls. And I'm not just going to make phone calls for an hour. I'm going to make phone calls into one very specific persona for an hour, or some type of subset of my target list that I can have a commonality about, right? They all use a certain technology. They're all using one of my competitors. They all are in this industry, or they all have this title, whatever it is. If we can find that commonality, because what happens there is we can then create a message that speaks to that persona. Call it like VPs of sales in the SaaS industry, right? I can do some homework and I can figure out what do VPs of sales in the SaaS industry care about, and come up with a message that speaks to that, and then 2 or 3 questions that are relevant to them, and then a story to tell. And that's where the case study comes in. So my favorite way of running a call blitz is to take a case study and reverse engineer it and say, okay, what was the result? Let's take first and foremost, let's look at the bottom of a case study and say, what was the result we drove for this client? Ideally, for those of you watching this, you have a decent marketing department that does have some quantifiable results you've been able to drive for your customers, right? Because that is your number one competitive differentiator, by the way. When it comes to messaging, coming up with we're the leading provider of, or better, faster, cheaper, or whatever, like that's all crap. Everybody says the same thing, and it's almost impossible to differentiate at the front end of the sales process. I almost guarantee that every single one of your competitors, whoever your competitors are, can make their product or service sound very similar to yours on that initial call. Now, in the middle of the sales process is where that's where we can really differentiate. That's where we can, have the conversation and uncover the need and then pinpoint the exact components of our solution that do make us different. But at the beginning, it's real hard. We all have the battle sheets against our competitors. We know what the strengths and weaknesses are. And so I can make mine sound very similar to my direct competitor, even though it's not really what I do. People say, oh, we got the best people. What do you think? Your competitors are out there saying, oh, look, our people are terrible. Our technology is awesome, but man, our people, that's tough, right? Or we give you a 360-degree view of your product and your clients and give you deep insights. Like, what are you expecting your competitors to be like, we give you a 180 view. It's pretty good. They're saying the same things. But the one thing that they have a hard time lying about, the one thing that they have a hard time misrepresenting, and what every one of our competitive differentiators are at the beginning stage of the sales process, is the results that we drive for our customers. That is the one thing that your competitors have a hard time lying about. So what I want to be able to say is, and it's the easiest way to come up with messaging, by the way, because now I'm not trying to make it up. I'm not trying to pitch anything or come up with any slick, saying to get you to be like, ooh, that's cool. I'm just talking about a result. So the easiest way to come up with messaging is to reverse engineer a case study. Look at the bottom of the case study and say, what result did we drive for this client? And turn that into what I call your attention grabber. So for instance, the elevator pitch is gross for so many reasons, right? Because it's way too long. It's super cheesy. It's general, and it's all about us. Whereas attention grabbers are meant to get someone's attention, all right? And you got to figure out what can you say in the first 5 to 15 seconds of a conversation to get somebody to go, tell me more. How do you do that? And the way I do that is by referencing customer success and customer examples. So I want to be able to say, hey, look, we showed this company in your industry how to drive these type of results. Now, I don't know whether I can do that for you, but you fit a very similar profile to that client, and I'd love to have that conversation with you about it, right? And try to stay away from stuff like, on average, our clients see A, or up to A, whatever it is. No. We showed this company in your industry how to do this, and I'd love to talk to you about it. So now that becomes my attention grabber. Then, keeping on the theme of the call blitz, then because that fits a very specific persona, I can come up with 2 or 3 messages that are specific to that persona, right? So instead of saying stuff like, oh, tell me about your priorities, which is a very general thing that usually gets very general answers, what I can say is, hey, we're typically dealing with VPs of sales in the SaaS industry who are telling us that their top priorities in 2018 or moving into 2018 are X, Y, and Z. Are those yours? Even if those aren't their priorities, the fact that you showed that you know that their world a little bit tends to open up the conversation. So now I got that attention grabber, I got 2 or 3 qualifying questions specific to that persona, and then I got a story to tell, which is the case study, right? So now I got this nice tight little package, and what I do is now I go run a list of everybody in my territory that fits that profile, and I call them all up and I say the same thing. And that's that power hour, right? So now I call everybody, hey, the reason for my call today is, and by the way, that's one of my favorite nuggets out of my training, is every single time you pick up the phone, start the conversation off with that phrase, the reason for my call is. Because if you cannot finish that sentence, you should not be making the phone call, okay? So, hey, the reason for my call today is we're showing VPs of sales in the SaaS industry how to drive these type of results, and I'd love to have that conversation with you. Rinse, repeat, right? So now you're catching a groove, and first few calls are going to be a little rough, whatever, but all of a sudden that 3rd, 4th, 5th call, you kind of got the flow there, right? And then all of a sudden somebody picks up the phone, and instead of having a heart attack about it, you can say, hey, thanks for taking my call. Do you got a couple of minutes? Well, who is this? What do you want? Well, this is John with Barrows, and the reason for my call today is we're showing other VPs of sales in the SaaS industry how to drive these type of results. As a matter of fact, we showed this company in your industry how to do this, and I'd love to have that conversation. What's the best way to get 10 minutes on your calendar to have that conversation? Now, ideally, they say tomorrow 2 o'clock, and I send you an agenda, right? And we put it on the calendar, we go from there, and I can prepare for it a little bit more. But most of the time, somebody's going to say, all right, fine, you caught me. What do you want to talk about? That's where I jump into my very specific questions to that persona, right? Again, show that I know what I'm talking about. And then hopefully engage and say, it's interesting you bring that up because, recently, this client that we were working with had a very similar challenge to you, and they actually implemented our solution, and this is what happened. Is that worth taking a deeper dive into? That right there, you came up with a message that got my attention. You have 2 or 3 questions that are relevant to me, and you told me a story that put context around your solution. To me, that is the perfect amount of value that an SDR can bring to the conversation that gets me as a prospect to say, okay, sounds interesting to me. Let's take a deeper dive. And that doesn't take anything away from the AE when you flip that over, okay? So that's where the main point of this conversation we're having here, or presentation I'm doing right now, is to try to find that answer to that level of value of what an SDR brings, and I firmly believe the case study is that level of value. So my recommendation for everybody out there listening to this is grab a case study once a week and get to learn how to tell the story. Right? Nobody likes pitches. Everybody likes stories. So learn how to tell that story and then go find everybody that fits that profile and make those phone calls and have those conversations. And also, some other nuggets here of just setting the stage for the conversation about what your role in this conversation is as an SDR. So your role is not to take a deep dive into the product. Your role isn't to sell them on anything as far as your solution is concerned. Your role is to sell them on the next step. That's what we're doing when we're prospecting, by the way. We're not selling our solutions, our services, right? It's impossible. I mean, unless you're selling something that's like $50 and it's a one-call close, you can't sell your solution in a 30-second pitch. You can't sell in a one-page email. So we got to stop trying. What we can sell when we're prospecting is time. We can sell the next step. And so that's what I'm focused on selling. There's this old school thing, if any of you have seen it, obviously most people have from sales, but it's the movie Glengarry Glen Ross. Now, if you haven't seen this movie, don't watch the movie. It's a depressing ass movie. But go on YouTube and watch the best 8 minutes of Alec Baldwin's entire career. And in there, he talks about ABC, always be closing. But he also talks about this, which is AIDA, attention, interest, desire, action. And I thought he made this up. But I looked it up. And this was actually the first thing to put any structure into sales whatsoever. So 1898, a guy by the name of St. Elmo Lewis came up with this. He said, these are the 4 mental stages we all need to go through before we buy something. First, something needs to get our attention. Then we have to be interested in it. Then we have to have a desire for it. And then we have to move to act. So if you think about it, right, how long do we have to get someone's attention in today's world? Seconds, right? I mean, that's why subject lines are so important. Right? I mean, I think I say 5 to 15 seconds. I think that's being generous. And an easy way to prove this out is take a look at your iPhone, right? And go through your emails. You look at the name of the person, right? If you don't know the name of the person, you look at the subject line. If you don't like the subject line, what do? You either delete it or move on. You know how long that takes on average? It's 2.7 seconds. It takes 2.7 seconds to determine whether I'm even going to read your email or not. Voicemails or calls. The first few words that come out of our mouth sometimes dictate where the conversation goes. You know, if you call somebody up and say, hey, how you doing today? Fine. What do you want? You've already put me in an annoyed mood. You don't care how I'm doing. What do you want? Why are you calling me? So that's why we have to get to the point, which is, again, why I love the reason for my call is, because it gets right to the point. So there's, again, reinforcement on that nugget. So again, we have 5 to 15 seconds to get someone's attention. And that's why, by the way, the historical elevator pitch fails. Because the historical elevator pitch is usually 40, 50 seconds if I didn't take a breath. And halfway through it, somebody's already like, all right, yeah, I'm all set. That's why I focus on attention grabbers. What can you say in that first 5 to 15 seconds, right? And again, that's why the result is the easiest way to do that. We showed this company in your industry how to drive these type of results. That's the attention grabber. And the goal there is to get you to say, tell me more. How do you do that? So I can earn an extra 2 minutes here, right? AI, attention, interest. Interest is about 2 minutes. That's where I can maybe ask you a few questions or two, and that's why I have to be very pointed with my questions to show you that I actually know what I'm talking about, and I'm relevant to your world. And then in that interest, that earns us the next stage, whether that's, and usually that's the detailed meeting where we can truly create desire and action. And that's really where, we take the deeper dive, and that's the AE conversation. And so everything that I'm trying to do when I prospect into new accounts and I'm trying to qualify them up front is I'm just trying to say something that gets their attention and then have an interesting conversation with them that then earns the right to set up that next meeting with my AE or whoever it is. Okay. So really think through that attention, interest, desire, action. 5 to 15 seconds to get someone's attention, 2 minutes to earn their interest, and then we create desire and action in a meeting. And again, that's why I think the case study is the answer to that whole story. Reverse engineer it. You got a story to tell. That's enough value. Then, by the way, some other small nuggets to think about. Try to set the stage. I was saying earlier, try to set the stage for what the conversation is. And how long it's going to take to quantify what you're asking for from the prospect. Do not, for instance, sell meetings. Don't say I'd like to meet with you, because most people, when I say I'd like to meet with you, the number that pops into most people's head is minimum 30 minutes, usually an hour. And nobody has any good feelings about meetings, okay? When you say I'd like to meet with you, effectively what you're saying is, hey, I'm going to take an hour of your time and flush it down the toilet, and you're probably going to want it back at the end. Are we good? Interested in this? Instead, again, sell time. Hey, what's the best way to get 10 minutes on your calendar? What's the best way to get 30 minutes on your calendar? Quantify what you're asking for. And I do the same thing when somebody picks up the phone. Hey, thanks for taking my call. Do you have a couple of minutes here? Well, who is this? What do you want? This is John with J. Barrows Consulting. And the reason for my call today is, I was on your website, or I noticed you then, and I want to talk to you because we're showing other companies in your industry how to drive these type of results. What's the best way to get 10 to 15 minutes on your calendar, have that conversation? Well, I got 10 minutes now. Okay, great. Well, this should only take 10 minutes. I have about 2 or 3 quick questions that I wanted to ask you about your situation. And then I'll share with you some of the components of our solution that actually I think might be able to make a difference if they can. And after that, we'll be able to determine whether it makes sense for us to take the next steps or not. Is that cool? You set that stage. You let somebody know how long the conversation is going to go. You kind of control it with somewhat of an agenda of how the conversation is going to go. And now they're comfortable with saying, okay, let's have this conversation, as opposed to trying to rush you off the phone because they don't know how long this conversation is going to last. Right? That's why a lot of times people, when we cold call them and they say, like, I'm super busy right now, or I'm in a meeting, it's like, no, you're not. You're not in a meeting. I mean, please, you're either the rudest person on the planet that picks up random phone calls in the middle of meetings, or you found out it was a sales rep and you realized you didn't want to talk to me. You're not in a meeting, right? But the reason people do that is because they don't mind that. That's not even a lie. When somebody says, "Look, I'm super busy right now," well, maybe I'm in a meeting is a lie. But when they say, "Hey, I'm super busy right now," that's not a lie. I could justify at any point in my life that I'm busy when I pick up the phone. Because it's easier for me to say that and then avoid you than it is to get into a conversation with you that goes longer than I want it to, and then have to interrupt you midway through and be like, look, dude, I'm sorry. I'm super, like, just, can we get, I'm not interested here. That's not cool. I don't like doing that. It's easier for me to say, look, I'm super busy right now. Call me back next week. But if you hit me back and say, hey, John, and I say, look, I'm super busy right now. Call me back, whatever. Hey, look, John, quantify. I got 2 questions. I need 2 minutes of your time. At the end of that, you can tell me to go away if you want. All right, fine. What? Again, quantify it. Hey, John, I need 5 minutes of your time. I got a few quick questions. At the end of that, you can tell me to go away if you want. Okay, cool. Like, quantify what you're asking, and then be very specific about the questions that you're asking and the value that you're bringing and what you're trying to accomplish here. You're not trying to sell them anything other than a next step. And this conversation is going to save us both a lot of time. Right? Because if we spend 5-10 minutes having a genuine conversation about what your situation is, I share with you my stuff, and at the end of that, it's clear. It's going to be clear one way or the other. Yes, this makes sense, or no, this doesn't. If it makes sense, fantastic. I set you up with a meeting to my AE. We have a good conversation, and we go take it from there. If it doesn't, then I go away. Right? Benefit to you either way. So one last thing that I'll put out there is, after you qualify the opportunity and you hand it off to the AE, please, please, please summarize the conversation you have with the client in what I call a brief summary email. So the way it works is this. Like, say you're trying to sell to me right now. It's not that I'm lying to you, okay? It's just, well, hopefully not. It's just that as soon as we get off this phone, your competition comes in and talks to me about something totally different. My boss comes in and changes my priorities. So now 2 or 3 weeks later, you could be selling to something that's completely irrelevant at this point. And for you to try to remind me what we talked about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I don't even remember what I said 2 or 3 minutes ago, right? So if you have it documented, now there's something to hold me accountable, and there's something to hold on a nice transition to the AE. So the way it works is this. You have to let them know this is coming, by the way. If you don't let them know this is coming, the response rates drop through the floor. But you say, hey, thank you so much for your time. All right, so say we go through that. Hey, the reason for my call today is we're showing our clients a few quick questions, story to tell, and then they say, yeah, okay, you know what? Let's take a deeper dive into this. Great. Thank you for your time. I'm going to go ahead and set up that call with my AE. Before I go ahead and do all that, though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly summarize what I was able to gain from our conversation today, and I'm going to send it over to you in a quick email and CC the AE. Could you do me a favor and email me back to let me know if it's all accurate and if I missed anything? All right, so you have to let them know it's coming. If you don't let them know it's coming, the response rates drop pretty low. But then what you do is you take your notes, and you don't write a book here, okay? And this isn't a chance for you to reiterate your value proposition. This is purely to confirm what you heard from them. So your current situation. So thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Below is a brief summary. Could you please email me back? Let me know if it's all accurate. Current situation is this. Your timeline is this. Your priorities are this. Here's who else you're talking to. Here are the next steps. You're going to do this. I'm going to do this. And I'd like to introduce you to my AE here and take it from there. There's a nice little seamless handoff, and it puts the customer at ease that I'm not going to have this conversation again. So now what the AE can do is when they start that conversation, hey, can we just quickly review this summary email and make sure that I get some qualifying questions here and then move forward, as opposed to, again, having the exact same conversation that they did with you, which is super frustrating as a client, okay? So anyways, I'm going to summarize things up in summary email. I'm going to summarize things up here. Hopefully you got some value out of this conversation. The key takeaways here are the value of an SDR is extreme in the business, but it's also one of the hardest jobs to do in sales. And because of the value and the question of how much value we bring, my answer to that is the case study and the story. So again, take case studies, reverse engineer them, come up with messaging about the results you drive for your customers, because that is your number one competitive differentiator. Then run a list of everybody that fits that profile, say that, have 2 or 3 questions that are relevant to that role, have a story to tell, set the stage for the next meeting, summarize the conversation, and move on. All right? If you have any questions or if there's anything I can do to help you, please feel free to hit me up. My website is jbarrows.com, jbarrows.com. I put a ton of free resources out there on my resource library and also my blog. I do also have online training courses that you could take that has all my Filling the Funnel program and my Driving to Close, and this is the exact same training that I give to clients like Salesforce, LinkedIn, Box, and all those other companies. You can also hit me up on any of the social channels like Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, any of those. My handle is John M as in Michael Barrows. So any one of those, hit me up. You can ask me any questions you want. And also, I do a Facebook Live thing every Monday. So I have a Facebook group where I'm pretty active in answering questions. And I do a Facebook Live, Make It Happen Mondays, on Monday at 12:30 East Coast time, where I light it up. Usually pick a topic or two and then riff on it for a little bit and answer questions that people have. So any one of those resources, I'm always happy to share insights, content to help elevate this profession, because when sales is the greatest profession on the planet when done right. It's the worst when done wrong. All right? So let's do it right. All right, let's make it happen. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.